John, did you have a question? Or jump out there in the
First, I want to thank you all for loving our community so much and for your passion and wanting to make a difference and for wanting to make change in our city government. Many of you were here and attended the Incumbents whenever they were being asked questions from this group. And after that event, I went into social media and I started seeing a lot of comments about some of the responses to some of the questions that the Incumbents have stated. I don't see any Incumbents here, and I'm sorry that they're not here. But is there a question that was asked that day that you were unsatisfied with, and if you had the opportunity to answer that question in front of an incumbent, how would you do so?
Just about every question that they answered, I was unsatisfied. You know, and I'm not going to focus in on one particular question because there were a lot. But what I will say is this. Throughout the whole discussion, the main thing that I saw was the apathy and the lack of engagement. You know, they were not interested in answering a lot of questions. They were disconnected. It's like they totally did not understand what we were thinking. I was in the back of the room, and so were you. You were here. You saw the whole thing. And I was just sitting there thinking, did they just say that? You know, and I'm not going to get into all that, but the truth of the matter is...
Now, please get into
the
the one question. Please, if you don't answer anything else, answer the one question that you know I'm thinking about.
She's thinking about the statue.
No, well, okay, so two questions. No, the one specifically addressing, and I'm just going to add, because I want to go for the throat on this one, because I'm still pissed. The one about domestic violence.
Oh, yeah. I'll answer that. So I believe it was the place 3 incumbent. You might note that. They were asked about how to solve domestic violence in our community. You know, as I noted earlier, we were ranked 5th in the state of Texas, which is really bad, especially for a population so small. So we really shouldn't be that horrible. But his answer was that it is a cultural problem and an economic poverty problem, to quote. And I think the whole room was probably taken aback by what he said. I don't think I can see anybody at least make one kind of sullen movement. And I think his reaction, or lack thereof, to everybody else's reaction kind of showed that either he meant it or he really just didn't get it. And so, yeah, that really rubbed me the wrong way, and I believe
What would you do to address the problem?
you know, we spend so much time focused on our wealthier areas of town that, of course, there's going to be more crime in those areas, in our areas that have poverty. That doesn't mean it occurs more in those areas.
It doesn't mean it's cultural.
And it doesn't mean it's cultural. You know, it's definitely going to be reported more in those areas. And I think that we need to spend a lot more time educating. We don't spend enough time educating we have a lot of different cultures here, and a lot of different languages. So if we put a message out in 1 or 2 languages, are we reaching everybody? Are we teaching everybody? Do we have people out in our communities teaching people and making them feel comfortable what to do, that they can call the police if there's a domestic violence situation? So we can hold the violators accountable for their actions and put a stop to it.
I just want to say tonight, when there was a question about sexual assault, and the answer was we're going to try to get more cases sent to the federal system. That's not correct. You can't do that.
Feds can't
Well-
pursue those, that's.
Yeah, sure they can.
They
They're the
are-
city council.
They do have a program right now, it's a federal program, and it is focused on our 3 worst neighborhoods as far as crime goes. Not necessarily sexual assault. They're focused on violent crime and repeat offenders, where they're processing them federally.
But you have to be repeat offender. That's,
The feds can't even go
Right.
after those.
Or
There
you
has
have
be
to
interstate
have it
commerce,
enhanced.
the whole thing.
There's a whole lot going
Feds
on.
can't do
Right,
that.
so I think that maybe they don't understand what that's about.
Well,
I
obviously.
think
I'd like to go back.
Claudette and then Rich and then Trey.
Well, I mean, I was just gonna say, domestic violence happens everywhere. I mean, domestic abuse, it happens everywhere. It happens on the south side of town as well. The only difference is you probably don't hear about it and they get away with it a lot more because people over there who have money, the cops show up and say, well, what's the deal? Well, he said, she said, okay, well, y'all just need to settle down, you know. Well, you leave for the night and you do this. I mean, that's kind of how things are handled on that side of town versus the other side of town where if the cops show up, y'all are both going to jail or somebody's going to jail. And so, you know, I think there's, with the treatment from law enforcement, the way that they arbitrarily enforce the laws, that's a big factor in it as well.
Also, if you have money, you can bond out and fight your case rather than sitting there and rot and take a plea so you can get out and go back to work.
And then there's the other thing, I mean, if,
I think Rich was next.
Everybody knows my history, you can Google it. I've been involved in domestic violence. Let's don't candy coat it, all right? Let me tell you, the biggest thing to solve the problem is being proactive, not reactive. I've been, the very first death call I ever went on was a domestic violence. And the man had beaten the woman, so none of her organs had worked anymore, and the whole family knew they were having issues. Law enforcement had came many a time, and this happened on the poor side of town, or whatever you want to call it, however that guy labeled it, okay? Well, guess what? The problem isn't with the after it's happened. We're great at prosecuting people. We're great at correcting them. The problem is, what are we doing before it happens? I want you to think about this. How many people in this room right now was raised by a single parent? Okay, just look at that right here, okay? And I promise you, if you go throughout the city, it's probably 40 to 50%. I mean, it's a big, big number. A young man or a young woman who only has one person, one gender in their life, okay? What do they learn about having a relationship? They don't learn nothing. Everything I've learned about relationships, I learned after I got in trouble through, it's called battery intervention program. They could have saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars doing what you said, because I had the money to fight it till I didn't know more. Okay? They could have saved me a lot of money if the first time the cops came to my house, instead of just letting one of us leave, okay? If they'd have said, here's your citation, sir. You need to go see the judge. You don't have to arrest me. They give me a citation, make it a misdemeanor, something. I'm sure they got something. And then you tell me when I get there. You don't have to charge me with domestic violence, because I'll tell you, there's some things you don't want to have in your background. You don't want to have a domestic violence charge in your background. You don't want to have a sexual charge in your background. You don't want to have a pedophile charge in your background. If you have any of them 3 things in your background, your chances of getting good employment are pretty slim, because most jobs do background checks, and when they discover that, they don't want to hire you because it's going to be a problem. But if our law enforcement would be given the tools through our municipal court system, which there's some things we can do with this, because the council has a great voice with the, correct me if I'm saying this right, or if I'm saying it wrong, we have a big voice when it comes to the law enforcement as far as the APD, when it comes to our municipal courts. And there are programs out there, I'm gonna throw you under the bus, Lyle, get ready. Lyle was my BIP instructor, okay? And I learned more about a relationship and triggers and things to do to avoid situations that escalate. If someone had taught me that a long time ago, the first time the cop came to the house, I might not have went through hundreds of thousands of dollars and ended up having to go through a big program if they would have just made me do it the first time. So the solution, folks, is not into prosecuting, because we're already prosecuting them. I promise you we are, okay? I've had days when I was a magistrate, I hand out 6, 8 magistrate order emergency protection in one day, okay? So we're prosecuting. The problem is, by the time they're at that point, there's already been some physical violence. When
The
I say
answer is
physical-
prevention.
Correct.
All right.
Well, like you said, prevention is kind of the direction I want to take from it, because we have to take it serious when someone says there's a problem. We have to, as a community, stop going, well, she just won't leave him. You know, we also have to stop going, it's always the woman that gets beat up, because sometimes the men get abused too. You know, so we have to look at the whole picture. We can't just go, well, she just won't leave him. Well, you know, sometimes she doesn't know that there's another option. Sometimes she doesn't know where to go. Sometimes she's too ashamed to even admit to herself that it's as bad as it is. And we, as a community, we have to come together and support each other. And I agree with what he was saying, like you're talking about with the citation. We've got to find another program, another way to stop this and get the people engaged. Maybe whether we get some anger management going or whatever we do, we've got to get these people.
Anger management. It's not anger management.
Well, no, it's
It is
control.
A
It's
decision
control.
to be quiet. I'm sorry.
Well, I agree, but we have to find some way to, like he's talking about, to stop it before it gets to that point. Whatever we find that works, you know, I'm not going to say that I have all the answers, but I do know what it's like to be hit in the face.
We do have several committees, you know, throughout the city that have subcommittees. And we can create new committees if there's a big enough problem that would justify that. Some of them are, you know, I think paid positions, I'm not sure, but most of them are volunteer committees and boards. And I think that if there is an issue such as domestic violence or drug use or whatever that issue may be, we can designate a board that can also designate subcommittees to try to address those issues, to try to come up with solutions or come up with preventative measures as well. So I think that's something we can look into. You know, the city council and the mayor, they don't know all, and they don't have all the answers, and they're not responsible for everything. So that's something, there's kind of the upper branch there that kind of just trickles down. So I think that definitely we're capable of implementing, creating those boards or subcommittees or whatever we would need to do to get there. But if that's something that needs to be done, we should definitely do it.
I agree the answer is prevention, but I think you've got to be careful with courts and cops enforcing this and relying on that, because you get in this cycle where there's federal grant money from the Violence Against Women Act that is paid to cops that arrest people on these and prosecutors that pursue them. Those BIP classes, they've got to give those to keep getting paid, and that reeks of, that's just nasty to me.
I worked with some ladies out of Family Support Services, and we were working on a program where it was upfront. You didn't get a criminal record. You didn't have to admit, which BIP, I think you have to admit that you've done something, whether you did it or not.
You don't lose your gun rights for life.
Yeah, you know. Anyway, but we were working on that program, and I knew right away I done scared some people, because a lot of people come against it. No, that's a form of punishment. That's this. They're not guilty. They're this. They're that. And the bottom line is, until we're ready to accept that there is people out there that do not know what a healthy relationship looks like, don't understand male privilege, the stupidest thing in the world. I never knew what that was, but I do now, you know. There's so much they can learn, and we can teach them, and I'm telling you, now, there are some people out there, and correct me if I'm wrong, that are bad, bad people. I heard a man say something in one of them classes, and I thought, I've never heard nothing like that in my life. So there are people that even educate them with the, the slap on the hand, let's go to this intervention program, learn some new skills, learn some relationship skills, learn all this stuff. It ain't gonna work on them. There's some, and for them, we just need to chop it off and get them on down the road.
All right, yet another, go ahead.
Two things that I just want to point out. I agree with everyone here what we're saying about the problem with domestic violence in Amarillo. But two things I do think we should consider. While Amarillo does have an extremely high, terrifying rate of reported domestic violence, you do have to consider we have resources like family support services. It does offer outreach for somebody to go get help, which would lead to something being reported as opposed to being unreported, which is a worse situation. So it's going to be a higher number because of that. But also, a thing we have to consider on a different end, if you go look at Amarillo mugshots on any given day of the week, look how many mugshots are for ridiculously low-level offenses. Annoyances, not terrors. And I'm saying how much of our police department is going after low-level offenses to make income and not things that are actually terrifying to our community. Because somebody running a stop sign or not wearing a seatbelt is an annoyance, but it's not a terror to the community. So I do think we need to reassess how the police department works, going after ridiculously low-level offenses that aren't really affecting the city on a dangerous level. And then we have high reported rates of really terrifying crimes. But those are the two things I want to point out.
APD, since 2007, has had the ability to not arrest people for Class A, B misdemeanor marijuana cases. But they keep doing it. I mean, Lubbock doesn't do it.
Yeah.
Canyon PD does. Anytime you say Lubbock doesn't do it, and we're behind Lubbock, I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
But they also only do it on Potter County cases.
Yeah.
They arrest them. They sit in there for 90 days on average. And that's $55 a day. It's a giant waste of money. It's about $500,000 a year locking people up on Class A and B marijuana cases.
And I think
money can be used much better elsewhere.
And I think it's also fair to say that minor marijuana possession offenses aren't a threat when drunk driving. I feel like in Amarillo is insane.
You don't smoke weed and beat your wife.
Or crash your car, or have a higher risk of crashing your car into a family in their car. I feel like we aren't paying attention to the actual threats to the community. We're making income off of ridiculous low-level offenses that aren't a threat to me and you.
Well, they're blowing money, though. That's what's fascinating. Like what? I mean, it doesn't do anyone. But anyways, Stephen.
You know what? I think I sat here and was listening to everybody talking. I went blank. Well, no, everybody was talking about prevention. Prevention. You know, none of us here are experts on domestic violence or sexual abuse or drug driving or the way the police officers enforce. But we would have the power or even the ability to find experts on these situations. I believe the domestic violence situation deserves an expert. Experts that live in our city. Like Hayden said, we've got the family support services that helps very, very closely. And I think Amarillo needs to realize these resources that we have and funnel, like you said, some of these wasted tax dollars into these important services before it gets into the hands of the law.
Careful, Stephen. If you're talking about the government helping poor people, that sounds like communism. That won't get you.
So the question was asked if there were any questions that were asked of the incumbents that we would answer differently, or mine's a little different. Someone had asked a question as to how much debt the AEDC was in, and it's around 80 to 90 million right now. None of them had the answer to it, so I just wanted to put that out.
There's no coordination with all the spending the county's doing. It's all the same pile of money. That's what I don't understand.
Monopoly money.
Any other complaints about the robot incumbents' responses?
Somebody want to talk about the statute?
I've spoken on the statute a couple of times. I think that's an important issue. It's been brought up by the citizens several times.
we're talking about Colonel Slavery in Elwood Park.
Yeah.
Exactly, yes.
I don't understand, he's like 3.5 feet tall, did they run out of money? Was
Well,
he a
I
dwarf in
found-
real life? I don't understand.
I found who I think he was based off of, which I've also been told that it's loosely honoring this soldier, and again, I can't remember his home.
This wasn't a city when the Confederacy was around, I don't
Right,
understand
right,
this problem.
exactly, and so I looked it up, the individual was born in Ithaca, New York. I believe he surrendered in Tallahassee, Florida, and died in Pensacola. So, has no connection to Amarillo or the people. You know, it's just, they ran on a racist and divided platform
Unless the
of,
first one was Jim and the last one was Crow, then it had.
of secede and enslaved, so.
Well, I joked
I don't
with
see
Steve and I said a Stevie Ray Vaughan statue would have made more sense because at least he was from Texas. But it's like it has no effect on our effective history.
I think they
at
also
all.
played in that park back in the day, so I, you know.
The Confederates.
Their answer to the statue was build a bigger, better statue.
You know,
Yeah,
That's
it
why
is.
it's so
I think what we ought to do though is go to the city council and say, no, you won't move this one, so it's your responsibility to build a bigger, better statue, and we want one of Martin Luther King twice the size of that.
And set it right on top of it.
Yeah.
now,
Just
how,
cover that.
how are we gonna compare to Germany, who doesn't allow swastikas, Nazi soldier statues, anything that honors the Nazi party, but we can't even get rid of statues of Confederates without people throwing fits at it. Or names or any of that stuff. I mean,
And we can't fall for half measures. I mean, Lee is not a solution. Putting another statue next to that piece of garbage is not a solution.
And it's bizarre too because there's not an effective attachment necessarily for anyone to that statue. Because I mean, even if you refer to people that were saying tear down the Cadillac Ranch because of Stanley Marsh, there at least was an argument going, well, Stanley Marsh was a person that lived here and did this for the community. Where with this, effectively, there's no effective connection to anyone for any reason for them to want it to stay there. It doesn't have to do with history. Nobody is specifically connected to that history enough for that to be there in the park. You go stare at it.
the women raised money for like 15 years. They worked really hard to raise the money to raise these statues, so.
For the-